to talk about CO2 global, talking about gas emissions for tourism activities. The approach that we're going to look at is that in the first case we are going to be looking at how customers of airlines can start choosing the right kind of flights and the most efficient carbon terms. And then we'll move on to look at sustainable aviation and the sort of general framework of what's actually going to be happening, we hope, in terms of reducing CO2. We'll then go on to Andy here at Thomas Cook, who will say exactly what they're doing at Thomas Cook. And then we will go, in the end, on to hotels with Robert McCann. So we have a range of things which we need to do relatively quickly. Just to sort of give you a kind of general framework of where we are. We're talking at the moment, I think, in terms of international travellers, just over 1 billion. And we're talking about something like 1.8 billion by 2020 or so. And the question then is, well, what happens in terms of flights? Well, the number of people who actually arriving as international travellers who go by air is between 52 and 55% at the moment. And that's obviously unlikely to reduce. So aviation obviously is a key element in all of this, but we should look at tourism as a whole. Tourism as a whole, there's a view which was put forward some little while ago as a result of research by the UN WTO, which suggested rather more than 5% was produced by tourism overall, of which 2+% was produced by aviation. So we mustn't forget that a lot of the CO2 production is actually involved in ground activities. It's not just in aviation. So we need to have a sort of balance and looking at that in the right way. Then, of course, we'll take questions. So we're going to plough through 7 minutes, I think we have for each person. Is that about right? And Dirk, we will begin with you, who's president and co-founder of Calasi. So if we can move this.
Hi everybody, my name is Dirk and I'm honored to represent our company Calasi here today. My presentation focuses specifically on engaging the air traveler, and there will be a little quiz at the end to spice things up. I'd like to begin with a few interesting figures. Every year 38 million global flights generate about the same carbon emissions as the entire UK across all its activities. Because passenger growth outpaces fuel efficiency improvements, we end up with a net carbon increase. Within the next 37 years, we will also see an additional 13 billion passengers. When it comes to accountability, typically we see the same list of usual suspects. But today, I would like to invite you to consider a slightly different but complementary angle, which is oftentimes being overlooked. The fine print on this slide is actually the airline slogan, "You are why we fly." I decided to fly in from San Francisco to speak to you today. And it takes about 7 bathtubs worth of jet fuel to shoot me across the Atlantic and back home. Now I stand in front of you as professionals and I'm talking about responsibility. So, can I really point to an airline or a government? Or should I acknowledge my fair share because I have a choice as a consumer? Let's talk about choice. Practically speaking, there's really only one way to get here fast: But within that mode of transportation, there are several options. The problem is that I, the consumer, don't have visibility into my impact when I book a flight because communication is broken. Food labels exist when I buy food. There's fuel economy ratings for cars when I buy a car, but where's MPG for air travel? If I have this type of information when I book a flight, then I can see, for example, that a flight from San Francisco to London can vary by 26% in fuel efficiency per passenger. On top of that, if it's embedded in the booking process, it becomes very actionable. It turns out people actually care. 2 studies show that 21% of travelers in the US welcome this type of information. And an independent study here in the UK shows that people acted on such information because 57% of them decided to book more efficient flights. Of course, not everybody's green. However, fuel efficiency brings other advantages that should appeal to everybody. One of them is the airlines. It's in their own economic interest to save fuel. Secondly, fuel-efficient flights do not have to cost more to the traveler. This is because airfares are decoupled from the price of oil at the dates of travel. And lastly, fuel-efficient flights are typically on aircraft that are newer, and these flights are direct. This in turn benefits the traveler because these flights are shorter and they have better amenities. This comes at this point, our company comes in, and what we do is we help travelers find more fuel-efficient flights on their favorite travel websites. We do so by packaging carbon data together with all the other goodies I just described. And we boil it down to a simple score that becomes an indicator for the overall quality of a flight. All of a sudden, responsible choices become possible, and they also make a lot of sense. We don't operate our own meta search engine or booking site. Instead, we syndicate our information to existing travel websites. And these 2 screenshots show what this might look like. The second one shows a breakdown of flight details, including the carbon data, and also a custom recommendation for the traveler. Where are we at? We're testing our product with 1,200 travelers right now. And even at this early stage, we've already earned a nice nomination by a publication in Canada. We're launching our first integrated partnership next month. And on the product side, we'll be personalizing our score, which means that if you're a business traveler, then we can prioritize flights that are more efficient and have Wi-Fi. And if you travel with family, then we can do the same with efficient flights that have personal entertainment. We acknowledge that this particular aspect is a very, very small piece of a large and complex problem. However, we have technology at our advantage, which means that we can enable change in a systematic fashion, and it can also scale. Here's an example. Orbitz powers about 1.5 million flight searches per day. If we could work with them to provide this type of information, it would provide instant awareness to many, many people. Consumers will be able to make informed decisions and enjoy better travels. Travel agencies will have product enhancements and competitive advantages. On the airline side, we could help them address another communication problem by providing an engagement channel that triggers new buying signals for them. And on the marketing side, I'd like to conclude with this. Aviation contributes to about 2% of global carbon emissions. Road transportation represents about 16%. If you look at this top 10 list of green brands, you see 4 car companies and not a single airline. Why? And now it's time for the quiz. The name of the game is Emissions Impossible. The question, what is the share of aviation amongst global carbon emissions? You can submit your entry at calasi.com/WTM and join our pre-launch list to enjoy custom scores as soon as we roll them out. And to add a little extra to that, we'd like to plant 1 tree for the first 100 correct entries. If you decide to reach out, here's my contact information, and I'm also placing business cards up front. Thank you very much.
Dirk, thank you very much. I'm sure that that short and clear presentation will encourage quite a lot of questions later on. I wonder if we can now move then on to Jonathan Council, who is coming here with the hat of sustainable aviation and will take us through quite a number of different slides, and I think this should be very interesting indeed to see where we've got to. Thank you. Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, so my day job is Head of Environment at British Airways, but here I am representing Sustainable Aviation, where I am the current chair. Sustainable Aviation, for those that don't know, it's a collaboration in the UK aviation industry of airlines, manufacturers, airports, and NATS, our Air Traffic Control Authority. Established in 2005, and essentially our mission is to help improve the environmental performance of the UK aviation industry through what we call cleaner, quieter and smarter flying. And one of the things that we recognise very early on is that carbon is clearly one of the key sustainability issues for the industry. So we produced something called the Carbon Roadmap. First one was produced in 2008 and it was updated last year. And essentially this shows how we in the UK aim to reduce our carbon emissions. So the red line at the top, that is what would happen if we just continue to grow with the same level of technology and the same operating efficiencies. And then the various colour chunks show what we plan to do to reduce our emissions by 50% by 2050. And I'll go through each of these in turn. So it's operating efficiencies, new technology, biofuels, and market-based measures. So operating efficiencies. So about 10% of that reduction is through operating efficiencies. And we've launched a number of codes of practice. Last year we launched something called the Departures Code of Practice, and it looks at things that we can do in an operating sense to reduce our emissions. APU, that's auxiliary power unit. Every jet engine has a jet aircraft has an auxiliary power unit at the back that we tend to use on the ground, and we're all working very hard to try and reduce the amount of APU usage on the ground. British Airways specifically, we've almost reduced that by 70%. At Heathrow. Other ways are reducing the number of engines that we taxi our aircraft on. Continuous climb operations, that essentially the most efficient place for an aircraft to be is in cruise. So therefore the idea is get to cruise as quick as possible. So that's what the continuous climb operations do. And then work very collaboratively with the airports. Make sure that we don't push back, for instance, from the stand until we know that we've got a takeoff slot to minimise the amount of taxiing. And as you can imagine, a lot of the activity in operations depends on efficient airspace instruction. So we work very closely with NATS to make sure that we minimise the amount of time that we airborne holding, and also try and find the most efficient routes. And there's a number of initiatives there. But you can see just since 2006, the cumulative savings just for UK aviation of 800,000 tonnes. It's fairly significant opportunity there in terms of air traffic control. But if you recall back to the chart, by far the biggest opportunity is with aircraft and engines. These will deliver significant carbon reductions over the next 40 years. So here's the next generation of Airbus aircraft, the 320, the Neo, 15% fuel reduction, the A350, 25%, the A380 at 20%, and then likewise with the Boeing, similar levels of carbon reduction for the Dreamliner, the 747, 800 and 737. And these are not theoretical aircraft. This is just a breakdown of some of the aircraft that have been bought here in the UK. Almost 200 of these next generation aircraft are on order for UK airlines. Over $30 billion of investment in the next generation of technology. And just if I put out a couple of examples with my BA hat on, we've got our first two 787s flying to Toronto and New York, and our A380s, the first two have also arrived there, flying to Hong Kong and LA, and they are 30% and 20% more efficient than the aircraft they replace. So it's happening now. Likewise, engines. The next generation of Rolls-Royce engine, the XWB, which will power the A350, that's the key to getting that 25% extra in fuel efficiency. So, the UK can be very proud. It is leading the global aerospace industry in terms of fuel-efficient engines. So that's all about the next generation of aircraft. The next generation beyond that, they will introduce a step change in carbon efficiency. So these are the goals that have been established by Europe's aerospace industry. So a 65% reduction in noise, but a 75% reduction in CO2 performance by 2050. So that's operating efficiency and technology. One that I'm particularly passionate about is alternative fuels. And here we're talking about sustainable alternative fuels, i.e. not first generation fuels. We're talking about fuels that will not compete with land that could be used for the production of food. Now, we've proven in the industry that these can work technically. There've been over 1,700 test flights. Now what we're looking to do is to build plants to start producing scalable volumes of these fuels. And both at British Airways and at Virgin Atlantic, we have are well advanced in constructing those plants, and particularly in BA, it'll be here in the UK. Actually, only about 20 miles from here, we will begin construction of our biofuels plant in the next 12 months. And with sustainable aviation, we're producing a roadmap. We believe by 2050, 30% of all UK aviation fuels will be alternative fuels. So they'll make a significant impact into reducing our carbon emissions. But if you recognise back on that chart, we understand that we need market-based measures to deliver that 50% reduction. We support emissions trading. We believe carbon pricing is the right way to incentivise reduction in carbon emissions. We believe that an appropriately implemented EU emissions trading scheme is the right way to go. We have some concerns about the way it's been implemented, not least from the retaliatory action that we're seeing, particularly from the Chinese and other states. But we welcome the progress that was made at the recent ICAO Assembly in just a month ago, where there is now a commitment to develop a market-based measure, a global market-based measure to deliver the industry target of carbon neutral growth from 2020. So that's a major step forward, and I don't think that I can't think of another industry that has made as much progress as aviation in terms of getting a global deal on carbon emissions. So in conclusion, hopefully I've got across the message that we as the industry are fully committed to playing our part in reducing CO2. You can see that technology plays a key role, be it aircraft engines or biofuels. We welcome the support and investment that we're getting from government, and we welcome the continuation of that support. And of course, we will work. We understand that sustainability is an industry challenge, and that's why we believe we will deliver success through collaborative efforts like sustainable aviation. So thank you very much.
The next presentation will be made by Andy Cooper, and he's from Thomas Cook. So rather than talking about the just aviation on its own, he's talking rather broader than that. And obviously it is a single company and what they are doing. So let's hear from Andy. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Get that onto slideshow mode. Most of you will know Thomas Cook. We are a vertically integrated group, both as a tour operator, travel agent, and we have our own airline. We are very much in the mass market, and I think one of the joys of mass tourism brings, and we're criticised for it, but from a carbon footprint perspective it's probably a good thing, is that we bring economies of scale. We're moving large numbers of people to large hotels, which I think actually has a benefit when you're looking at our overall footprint. And it does make a difference, and as Martin says, I'm effectively the bridge between your presentation on aviation and the presentation on hotels, because we as a contractor of those services are interested in both ends of the spectrum and in trying to make sure that all parts of our supply chain can actually deliver sustainable solutions. Just a very quick advert, just so you understand who the Thomas Cook Group are. Whether you're based in the UK or elsewhere, you can see a sort of breakdown of the brands in our organisation. If you look at the role of the vertically integrated operator, I think there are effectively three aspects of what we do. Firstly, we can manage our own emissions and those within our own direct ownership or control. We can exercise an influence over our supply chain to try and make sure that supply chain behaves more responsibly. And we also, I think, have a very important role in relation to education, because one of the areas I think that causes part of the problem here is lack of awareness and behaviours which, by simple changes, can actually improve the overall impact of tourism as a whole. And the education aspect, I think, applies as much to our customers as it does to the staff, of our own staff and the staff of our suppliers. Because I think if we change customer behaviour so they consciously start thinking about what they're doing and why they're doing it, it can make a difference. I think as a mass market tour operator, one of my observations would be, and I know that if you're in the room, the Justin Francis would disagree with this view, but I don't believe that most buyers of holidays from mass market tour operators are buying that holiday because they want to have a responsible holiday. They're assuming that we will take steps to make sure that it's not an irresponsible holiday, and I think that for us is the important bit. We've got to take steps to deliver, if there's such a word, non-irresponsible holidays. So if I look at the aviation component from us, there's two parts to this. There's a micro and a macro, and I think you've heard from Jonathan talking very much about the macro level, which I think is about making sure that aircraft are designed right, that airspace is well designed to minimise the impacts aircraft have on the routes they operate, and make sure that fuel can be delivered that can actually make a big impact here. The other aspect I think that we're very conscious of as a charter operator is that for us, charter airlines are generally, if you look at grams of CO2 per revenue kilometre, we're actually better than almost any, or revenue passenger kilometre, we're better than most, just because we fill our aircraft. And I think I'll come back to my point, the mass market is actually good because our aircraft run incredibly full. So that does make a big difference. But then there's also, I think equally importantly, in the short to medium term, there's a micro aspect to this. Some small changes to aircraft design, such as the installation of sharklers, which are the tips on wings, make a big difference to fuel consumption. They pay back over the space of about 2 years. They reduce overall fuel consumption by about 5%. So it almost becomes a no-brainer to any airline to say, let's get those onto our aircraft if we can. And for us, one of the big areas is around weight. If you take weight off an aircraft, it makes a big difference. And there are lots of things you can do. And I think airlines are becoming increasingly imaginative in finding solutions. Whether the driver is an economic driver to say, let's save fuel cost, or a carbon driver, I think the two do become sort of linked to each other. And the fact is, by taking weight off an aircraft, such as removing unnecessary equipment, moving sort of, for example, just to give you a simple example, on our aircraft, we've taken a conscious decision, all of our pilots, instead of carrying a really heavy briefcase full of manuals, both pilot and co-pilot each have a set of manuals, there was one on an aircraft. You can save yourself around about 5 kilos per person just by giving each of those pilots an iPad. And that's made, over the course of a year, does start to mount up to significant differences. Replacing seats on aircraft makes a difference as well. And it's interesting that Ryanair are much criticised, and for very good reason in most instances, but they have for many years encouraged people to minimise the amount of baggage they're taking, or to penalise them if they try and take too much baggage. But actually, getting customers to take less baggage, and I come back to my point about education, probably makes as much difference as anything we can physically do on the aircraft. So the idea of saying to customers, you take 10 kilos, it's a lot different to saying you take 20 kilos. So the more we can do to encourage our customers to think like that, the better it is for us overall. And then similarly in relation to aviation, just trying to do a bit more planning about routes. We've been carrying out some work over the last year on what we've termed optimum flight, to try and see if we can work with the biggest challenge, I think, in trying to get to an answer in relation to airspace across the globe is that there are many different airspace providers who seem to have a wonderful inability to talk to each other. And just getting them to talk to each other so you can plan a route for a sort of efficiency makes a big difference. But to try and get that route planning done becomes a major exercise. So it's one of those areas that just trying to get something as simple as that done is something that does make a difference. And hence why in the longer term a solution such as Single European Sky is something that benefits all of us, because at least then you've got airspace providers who have to talk to each other because they're all part of the same overall scheme. So aviation can make a massive difference, and as Martin alluded to at the opening on his presentation, equally our hotel supply chain makes a big difference to us as well. Our major area here is about education of our supply chain, to say to our hoteliers, understand what you do, and then you can start to make a difference. We, along with TUI, are trying to encourage our hoteliers to sign up to some form of a sustainability certification. We're working with an organisation called the Travel Life Sustainability System, which delivers an education to our hoteliers to make them aware of what they're doing and hopefully encourages them to change behaviours. If we can get that, then that's half the battle as far as we're concerned. It may not be the whole answer, and I heard a very interesting quote at a conference I was at last week where one of the speakers said he didn't approve of benchmarking, because he said effectively benchmarking set a standard, and what most people did was try and work up to that standard and not beyond it. And I think one of the things that we're really conscious of, if you're going to do all of this, you've got to encourage people to go beyond the benchmark and move into that standard of good behaviour. So it's one of those areas that we are trying to get hoteliers to think and understand that it's much more than something just like towel washing. It's very interesting when you ask a hotelier what have they done. The first thing they'll always come back with is say we'll wash the towels less often, and they seem to think that's being sustainable. We're very conscious, and we have to educate the hoteliers to say that all right, it's a good step, or it is a step, but it's nothing like what the hotelier needs to do. And I think, as I say there is something far more fundamental and basic. The hotelier and their staff do need to understand all of their impacts, and if they don't measure it, then they've no way of knowing what those impacts are. For us, hoteliers need to prioritise on the biggest areas of risk, and things like energy sourcing can make a big difference. And I think we are in a perpetual conflict here, and particularly when I look at our business to sort of holiday destinations, when you look at water usage as well, I think water is next year's carbon, so we've got to start thinking about water usage. And one of the big areas we've got is effectively the amount of fresh water we've got in the world. We've got to encourage people to start looking at alternatives. If we start encouraging them to say, well, why not go for desalination, you then start to run into a whole area of carbon usage there as well. So I think there's a lot of stuff that we need to think through, and we need to persuade our hoteliers to think further. But we're taking sort of small and tentative steps, but we are trying to make a difference across our supply chain. And hopefully with that will segue nicely into the next speaker. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, Robert, take over and talk to us about hotels. And
Thank you.
it should be very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, I was just going to say, so it's definitely more than just cleaning your towels. No, that's not me. It's this one. But also, definitely agree water is the next carbon. So if you're here tomorrow, come and see the water debate, because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. I'm not here to talk specifically about what IHG are doing Intercontinental Hotels Group. It is slightly more of an industry perspective, although we'll talk about IHG just a little bit. Is this one? Okay. So I'm Rob McCann. I'm a Corporate Responsibility Manager for IHG. I focus on environmental sustainability. And just to introduce the company, because you may not have particularly heard of us, you'll probably know our brands. So our brands down there at the bottom, obviously Intercontinental, through to Holiday Inn, Crown Plaza, one of the world's largest membership reward organisations, with the IHG Rewards Club. That's the old name. So we are one of the world's largest hotel companies. We've got over 4,600 hotels, 679,000 guest rooms in over 100 countries. And we've also got another 1,000 odd hotels in our pipeline, which means us, along with many of the major hotel companies in the world, are still expanding and rapidly expanding, particularly in the emerging markets. So as we think about environmental impacts, obviously we're thinking about the impact that 1,000 hotels is going to have. And water in particular is a really big issue, particularly in Asia and the Middle East. We're also primarily a franchise and management company, which means we only own about 8 or 9 hotels in the world. So we have to have strong brand standards to deliver what we want for the guest. And it also presents a real challenge when it comes to environmental management, because a lot of it's about persuasion and getting engagement from hotels and the people that work there. We can't enforce this on them. So in terms of the industry, as I said, I'm not just talking about IHG here. As an industry, we're really starting to make a movement. So all the major hotel companies around the world, representing tens of thousands of hotels, have all been setting targets. Now, to be honest, the hotel industry has probably been a little bit of a laggard when it comes to carbon management and setting targets. So this is a really good step, having companies having really concrete targets. We've recently announced ours, which are to reduce carbon per occupied room by 12%, and that's in our global estate, including the franchise hotels, which is an important point. And as you can see, all the other major hotel companies have all got varying different targets. And really, this is the kind of the main point I wanted to talk about, that as an industry, we are collaborating, we're working together to deliver change on real scale.
So the one thing that I will talk about here is about doing something at scale. If we have an impact on our 4,600 hotels in IHG and have a bit of an impact and raise the baseline, it has a huge impact overall rather than focusing on individual hotels. So as an industry, we've come together, we've collaborated and tackled a particular issue, and that issue is how does a hotel actually measure and report the carbon footprint of a room, a guest night, the overall hotel, and for a meeting. So as you can see, our guest on the left-hand side, really confused. Now that's a normal guest and that's a corporate client as well. There were so many different ways of measuring a carbon footprint. Everyone was doing it in different ways. No one understood it. I don't know if that's the case in the airline industry, but it's definitely been the case in the hotel industry. So as a industry, we've worked together and we've developed a methodology. You can see the big names on the right-hand side that have all been working together. There's over 20 of the largest hotel companies in the world. We developed a methodology to calculate the total carbon footprint of a hotel, carbon footprint per occupied room, so we've all agreed that that's the standard measure, and the carbon footprint of a meeting, say for corporate clients holding meetings in hotels. Now, that's currently being used or available to be used by over 16,000 hotels, and those are some of your biggest hotels around the world with the biggest chains. And you can see there on the bottom, those are the kind of two standard measures. That's how it looks in our own system, which is called Green Engage, which I'll talk about in just a second. I guess the major point really, and something perhaps for the airline industry to take into account, is how we have collaborated as an industry. We've actually solved a problem that was a real problem for the industry. We were getting corporate clients left, right and centre, third-party intermediaries asking for this information. We were struggling to give it, and we were giving it in various different ways. So we've solved a problem by working together and driving change at scale. Now, I'll talk very briefly about this. This is how we're managing it in IHG. As with many of the major companies, they're developing their own internal proprietary systems. Ours is called IHG Green Engage, so it's an online tool. It's a program for the hotels to track and measure their environmental impacts, so energy, waste, water and carbon. And to implement, there's over 200 green solutions built within the tool. We've got over 2,500 hotels enrolled, so that comes back to the issue around not being able to force the hotels to do it. We've had some good successes today in terms of reduction in carbon and energy. We've got lots of green solutions that have been implemented. And it's also helping us to make sense of the really complex world of green certifications. So if you were in the session earlier, you'll have heard there's lots of certifications out there. Everyone's kind of trying to work together. Green Engage helps us to do that, helps us to kind of tackle that problem for our hotels. And then finally, as an external focus, I've talked to you about the challenges from corporate clients and guests. So we know that 75% of our frequent travellers that make up a big portion of our revenue really care about the environment. So basically, if all things are the same, if the price of a room's the same, then they're probably going to want to choose the greener hotel. Now, the definition of what's a greener hotel is another topic altogether. So as I've said, increasingly our large corporate clients are asking more and more detailed questions. Green Engage is helping us to answer those. And the Global Business Travel Association have developed a specific corporate responsibility question set that large corporate clients can add into their request for proposals. So if they say, I want 20,000 room nights next year from you, how much is it going to be? They're also now potentially asking really difficult corporate responsibility questions. And one of our solutions in terms of how that's represented to guests is through our own booking channels with the Green Engage logo on the website. So that's what we're doing internally. So hopefully just some interesting thoughts and challenges, and it's certainly not been smooth sailing, but I think as an industry we've really taken a big step forward. There's plenty of work to do, but getting the measurement in the first place is a really big step forward for the industry.
Thank you very much, Rob. Very good. We're now going to be open for questions. I'll start off, if that's all right. I want, first of all, to start with Dirk. If you're talking about choosing efficient flights, I remember talking with the chap who ran Air France, who was saying that were all his aeroplanes of the same CO2 efficiency, they would be producing 30% less just by the change of the fleet. So when you are talking about choosing a particular airline, it is actually the individual aircraft that you need to know, whether it's a 777 or whether it's a 350 or a 380 or whatever. I mean, and are you going to put that in your scheme?
So that's a very good question, and I'd like to clarify that we don't actually rate airlines. We're helping consumers choose flights. And so that means at the point of sale, when you look at, let's say, a given Expedia page, you may have 50 results across multiple airlines. Some itineraries have mixed airlines. What we do is we extract the airline information, the aircraft data, and for each segment, we understand the distance. And then we add it all up to determine a CO2 number at the aircraft level. And then knowing the particular seating configuration of that aircraft under that airline, we break it down at the seat level for each cabin. So it's really more looking at the consumer side of things.
But the consumer side, you're able to look at each and every aircraft that is used. That's the point.
That's right.
Yeah, and the configuration that they choose.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it was important to clarify that. Otherwise, it would look a bit odd, it seemed to me. The second question I had relates to sustainable aviation and about biofuels. There are several issues relating to biofuels. I mean, you said, that they're not fuels, first generation fuels which competed for land, for food. But are these biofuels likely to be more expensive than aviation spirit? Are they needing subsidies from governments in order to be used? Are they mixed with aviation spirit in a certain percentage or something in order to change the balance? Those are the three different things that seem to me to be quite interesting questions to just have a bit clarified.
Yeah, if I start off with the mixing, is it? Can you hear me? Sorry. Yeah, if I start with mixing. So currently, biofuels, two pathways have been approved. One is what they call Fischer-Tropsch, just a process for producing a particular type of fuel, and what they call fatty acid type pathway. They are both approved to use up to a 50% blend in aircraft around the world today. So, but there will be, to your question around how expensive they'll be, it really depends on the different pathway. Some of them, particularly the crop-based routes, tend to be more expensive today. But we
Is that volume question?
Yeah. So and it depends on the type of fuel that you look at. Anywhere from 2 to 5 times more expensive than jet fuel today. But of course, we're in very early days in terms of developing those fuels. And once we've improved the agronomy and of course the scale, the key that to making these economically feasible is to produce them at scale. And we don't do that today. So that's on the crop-based side, but on the waste-based fuels, so taking regular waste like agricultural waste, domestic waste, and so on, those can be produced at roughly the same price as today's jet fuel. So those can be cost competitive.
And what about volume relating to that? Is it possible to build up the volume of those as well?
Yeah. So if I give, just wearing my BA hat at the moment, so we're looking to build a waste-to-liquid plant about 30 miles upstream from here in the UK. That will take 500,000 tonnes of waste per year, and that's about 2% of BA's total fuel consumption. Now in the UK, we have about 200 million tonnes of fuel, of which about 100 million tonnes goes to landfill. Therefore, looking for alternative. So there is a lot of waste available. So we can build dozens of these plants here in the UK. So there's plenty of material. There are competing uses for it. Some of it goes into incineration and so on. But our view is that we think producing sustainable fuels, ground fuels and transport fuels is an efficient way of using this waste. So no, there's plenty of waste out there, and there's a lot of interest, particularly in countries in the subcontinent, where again they're rapidly expanding, they're producing a lot of waste, they're wanting to avoid some of the issues that we've had in the developed world around landfill. So again, I think we'll start to see, once we've proved the concept with this early plant, we'll see a lot more of these plants spring up around the world.
And if you do the analysis from taking the waste and the whole process of changing the energy needed in order to create these fuels. What is the CO2
Life cycle saving.
Yeah.
Yeah. So waste is probably the most sustainable pathway because you're recycling waste. So the route that we're looking at here in the UK has a 95% life cycle saving over jet fuel. So it is.
Repeat
that.
So
the 95% CO2 saving over the jet fuel pathway, and simply because you're recycling waste. Now it could be even better than that. Because we haven't taken into account that waste that goes to landfill produces methane. So by avoiding, and that's a big issue for those not aware. Landfill is a big issue here in the UK. Half of our waste goes to landfill, and therefore if we can find efficient ways of using that waste and avoiding landfill, there will be an additional benefit because we'll avoid the production of methane.
And methane is one of the
it's a very powerful greenhouse gas.
emissions.
It's 21 times more powerful greenhouse gas agent than CO2. So really there's a lot of focus on looking to reduce landfill, not only because it takes up precious land, but because of the production of methane.
Very interesting. Andy, you were talking about travel life and the work which has been going on. But you didn't mention at this stage any of the real achievements, and measures that might be emerging from all of this. Is this because actually in terms of CO2 it's been quite a slow process to get going on this, or is it simply that you didn't give the information?
Partly because we don't entirely measure this, and one of the outputs, the encouraging a hotelier to sign up to Travel Life is to get them to change their own behaviours. What we're not doing is actually tracking back to measure on an individual hotel basis how the hoteliers perform. And actually it dovetails very nicely with the ISG work, because I think that it then becomes much more easy for the hotelier to start measuring the changes that they're delivering. So I think we see our role of that tool is getting that as an education tool rather than as a measurement tool. And the measurement tools come elsewhere. But yeah, it is there to start driving change in culture rather than deliver.
Do you find that because you're having hotels under contract, it means to say that you do have some influence over them because you're attempting to fill their hotel and you won't necessarily sign a contract unless you're satisfied by all the contractual terms?
That ultimately is the final sanction. Nobody yet has gone as far as using that as a sanction. I think what we're trying to do is to get hoteliers educated rather than compelled. Having said that, I know that our major competitor is now looking to make it a contractual term, and we're in the process of launching a quality assurance initiative, part of which is saying that for our most important strategic hotels, they will have to commit to a sustainability accreditation.
Are there hotels that squeal at this measure?
Ironically, not particularly, because it comes back to the point that saving carbon is saving cost. Yeah. And once you can convince a hotelier of the logic, it becomes a much easier sell. And part of the problem is actually getting over that first hurdle. And one of my former colleagues once used to say that you had an initial stage where you could actually say to a hotelier you could save big cost just by taking some sensible environmentally efficient measures. Then they start having to incur some real costs to start changing processes. For me, the biggie is that at the moment you get a huge amount of water used by hotels that gets used once, which is, I think, incredibly wasteful. And just trying to get them to start saying, well, let's look at ways of using your water more efficiently. That has a short-term cost for the hotelier in doing it. Then there's a long-term benefit. So, but the short-term stuff, saying to a hotelier, yes, sign up to an environmental accreditation, is a relatively easy sell in principle. It's about them making the time to then do it, which is the harder sell. So.
Can I follow?
Yes, please. No, and comes in very neatly. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're absolutely right. I think, as soon as you're a hotel's biggest clients, at the end of the day, revenue, booking rooms, one of their clients is saying to them, you need to be doing this. I mean, that's probably the biggest push of them all, because that revenue is potentially under threat. And actually, it makes my job a lot easier to get the hotels to do what we want them to do. If we can say, that Thomas Cook are saying, potentially, $100,000 worth of business is not going to come your way because you haven't done a green certification or you haven't, invested in energy efficient lighting, not just TAL programs. Then that's going to be the biggest push to get the hotel to do anything. I think the other piece is getting to do the certification piece in the first place probably isn't a problem. It's actually a lot of the issues around finance and the hotel having the cash to be continually spending on energy efficiency, and they totally get that the environmental issues are important and carbon management, but a lot of hotels at the moment aren't particularly flush with cash. And anything anything over 3-year payback is probably going to be a bit of a challenge for them, and they're not going to do it until they do the next big refurb. So, that's just some of the challenges the hotels face. But definitely, the more and more corporate clients and the big accounts start pushing, the more you're going to see the hotels doing stuff.
I suppose for me one of the frustrations of all of this is that all the good work of a hotelier can very quickly be undone by their staff. I'm going to give you the sort of classic example, the hotel that moves to sort of lighting in rooms controlled by the room key going into the socket. How often do you walk into a hotel and the maid's just left a sort of spare room key in there so that the lights are on the whole time? So part of the win is immediately lost. And again, that and my point about education, you've got to get the hotelier staff that have bought in as the hoteliers themselves and these sort of things.
Have you, Robert, had, because you've got a big remit, given the number of hotels, finding champions to actually want to do things, or have actually people been pretty supportive of the kind of move that you have in mind?
Well, I guess, because we're a franchise or primarily, we do have to rely on engaging every hotel or owner group, and you get a real mix. But generally, most people get it and think it's important. Increasingly, we're seeing a generation of people wanting to do something about it because they want to protect the world for their kids and their grandkids. We get that a lot from our owners and the Owners Association. We have to do our job based upon a network of champions around the world. People that are engineers in particular, and we have to do that because we're only a small team and we cover the whole world. So, but what we do is Green Engage is the way that we can drive, as I said, action at scale, because it's about each individual hotel, the hotel taking responsibility, and the first thing we tell them to do is set up a green team, get the general manager to take responsibility, build a team around them with people that are either heads of department or are interested in the topic. We get a lot of people in hotels who really care about this stuff, and get them to take responsibility for what the hotel's doing. Because, I can't do it all. I try, but I can't.
Difficult, yes. Right, we've heard from them. We haven't heard from you. What questions have you got? Has anybody got any questions you'd like to put to the panel? Yes, sir. We've got a microphone for you. If you could introduce yourself too, thank you.
Sorry, John Williams. I'm a blogger interested in sustainable travel. My question's for Robert. I've read all the work that IHG's been doing, and the other partners with working out some metrics for carbon footprints. When would I, as a consumer, be able to select a hotel room based on carbon footprint? As part of the criteria of my selection criteria being the carbon footprint for that particular room in that particular chain?
Good question. Wouldn't be able to put a time frame on it. I think the first step that we've taken is to highlight a Green Engage hotel on our booking channel. Realistically, the next step is making, I guess, the action that a hotel's taken customer facing, in terms of actually putting a carbon footprint figure on our booking sites. It's not in the immediate future. I know there's people from certification programs in the room. They may have an interesting take on it. I think the challenge is that it's good to have the uniform measure that we have. The challenge is that it's not as straightforward to just say, well, which hotel do I choose based upon a carbon footprint? Because every hotel's different. So the industry has to think very carefully about how we present that information. and does it in a way that is about building knowledge within our guests, and not just people making a decision because they think one hotel better than the other, when that may not be the case. So I'd say it's not in the immediate future, but it's definitely moving towards that. There is increasing demand for data. So I think and I forgot to name drop earlier, but the Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative, which was the initiative of the industry, will drive us towards that direction, I would expect.
You see, it's just an interesting point, really. I remember that Thomson, we had the measurement of quality scores, because everybody sitting in the aeroplane coming back, they filled in the quality scores. So we were then able to summarise those and put them against hotels, and those who won gold awards were then identified as gold award winners. Now, this actually had an effect upon the overall standards of that the hotels provided, because more people chose the gold award winners from the brochures, and now obviously from the websites, and therefore it was to their advantage to be a gold award winner for quality.
Mm-hmm.
The moment you start finding the same sorts of cycles of activities can be identified in the hotel, that people choose the low carbon footprint rooms, that then surely will encourage others to do the same. I mean, in other words, you have internal competition, in effect.
Well, effectively, what we're talking about is doing what we're doing for corporate clients, but making it for the, visible to the kind of everyday guest, and your leisure business. But
yeah. Right, now, who else? Yes, please.
Sorry, just coming back on the carbon footprint per hotel bedroom or per guest night, it's a real dangerous move for hotel sector to start looking at that, because it's different hotels, particularly with busy ground floors, leisure centres, etc., will naturally have a larger carbon footprint per the hotels. I've run a certification programme. The hotels that have the lowest carbon footprint are the economy budget. A Formula One hotel pretty much has the lowest footprint per sleeper night. That doesn't mean it's a better environmentally managed hotel than a Crowne Plaza. So that's a really dangerous route. I think the HCMI programme is going a certain way. It's about telling businesses what your footprint has been, but is it a competitive advantage? There's so many different variables. It's a really tough one.
It's probably partly why the industry did collaborate, because we actually recognised that we were better off doing it together and having a uniform way of doing it, making it easy for the hotels, because it wasn't the competitive edge. And you're absolutely right. Just one thing is that the way the methodology works, getting a bit technical, is that it is about the rooms and corridor space. So, but there will be the difference between a limited service and a full service hotel. So, I mean, if you're going to make a decision between a Holiday Inn Express and a Crowne Plaza, the numbers are going to be fairly, quite different.
Yes, more questions. Yes, thank you. From the back there.
Keeping fit, running around.
Any ladies going to ask some questions?
From.
Sorry, I'm not a lady.
Not yet.
Not yet. Chris Surgeon from Green Air Online. Still on the carbon footprint question, but mainly from an airline point of view, which both Jonathan and Dirk might like to respond to. I noticed TUI Travel Airlines, their head of sustainability, recently called for a standardisation of a sort of common metric for airlines to report their fuel efficiency effectively. And I don't know what Jonathan feels about that and how British Airways approaches it. Yeah. And also perhaps for Dirk, how does your metric work, and do you take into account things like load factors and all the rest of it? And also, Dirk, could your system perhaps be applied to the hotel industry as well, so the traveller gets the whole carbon footprint business all in one go when they book on Expedia or wherever?
So
you start at the start, yes, ma'am.
I think the most important point to make, first of all, is the standard measure on carbon emissions is tonnes of CO2. Yeah. So, I mean, efficiency is important, but the way we're going to address this problem is by reducing our absolute CO2 emissions, which is why the aviation industry has got absolute carbon reduction goals of 50% by 2050. So that's a 50% reduction in your absolute CO2, and also carbon neutral growth in 2020. So that's the first thing that was very important for the industry to recognise. It's got to be talking about tons of CO2 because that's what's causing the problem. Of course, beyond that, we need to understand and be able to compare fuel efficiencies because we have an industry target to continue to improve by 1.5% per year out to 2020. And it's pretty straightforward, really. There's only two measures in the industry. There's grams of CO2 per passenger kilometre, or there's litres of fuel per passenger kilometre, and they directly translate by a simple formula from one to the other. So it's fairly, I don't think...
What do you mean there's very high correlation between the two?
The exact correlation is a standard formula. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, you have to take into account the specific density of the fuel, but assuming you take a global average on that, then you've got, it's a simple translation, it's like inches to centimetres. So I don't see that as a particular hurdle. IATA are doing a lot of work to collect airline industry fuel efficiencies to be able to report on the 1.5% target. So we'll expect something relatively soon to come out of that. And also ICAO are doing some work, that's the International Civil Aviation Organisation as well, to again report on global fuel efficiency measures. So I don't think it's a big challenge for the industry, but fundamentally what we should be talking about is tons of CO2 because that is what causes climate change.
And you can do that by per passenger, or
Well,
per passenger kilometre, maybe.
yeah, no, you can do it as an efficiency measure very straightforwardly, but fundamentally, what the industry has to do is how it's going to reduce its total tons of CO2.
Sure.
That's the challenge.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, Dirk.
I had time to prepare my answer.
Yeah.
So your first question was around the methodology. We use the Corinair model, which is what the environmental agency in Europe also uses, and it basically factors in what I said earlier, the airline, the aircraft, the distance, seat capacity. We will be adding seat density or load factor and freight share before we launch to our first customer. In the long term, we acknowledge that this data is estimates. The flights haven't taken off yet, so there's only so much accuracy we can get. But it's comparable to an MPG for a car. It also depends how you drive and how full your trunk is. In the long term, we would like to position ourselves more as a TripAdvisor or Yelp, whereby we provide a platform and the data comes from businesses and consumers. So ideally, we would get data from the airlines directly, and that would be much more reliable, of course. Your second question was around hotels, and I think that would naturally lead into that. If we can position ourselves as a holistic platform, then we would love to work with as many parties as possible.
Next question.
Hi there. Fran Hughes from the International Tourism Partnership. We're one of the organisations behind the Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative. Actually, my question was asked by the previous questioners, but I'd just like to add a couple of points about the Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative. Totally agree that it's not just about the figures, and hotels do vary in their size, their location, in the amount of facilities they have, but I think we've had a huge achievement thanks to the support of companies like IHG and having over 16,000 hotels now globally actually just knowing their carbon footprint. The opportunity there for the industry and for those individual properties is huge. They look at actual data now on their performance with a view to being able to measure, report and ultimately reduce that.
Good. There's time for one more question. You've got your hand up. Good. In the front here, can we have this is the last question, because I think we have to finish here after this question. So we await the last question.
My name is Carmen Fells from Global Insight. And Robert, I just wanted to know if you said a couple of times that you guys can't make the hotels do it. Is it that you can't or that you don't want to? I was just wondering if you could put it in the franchise rules for going forward, even if you can't do it for those that are already in place. And I feel like there's a market for it, so it might be an easy sell.
It's not an easy sell. You're right, we would love to. And we may get there at some point. Changing, franchising has existed for, I don't know, a century or something. And franchise agreements are difficult to change, and they're for long periods of time. So we'd be talking at the moment about every time we renew a franchise agreement, which doesn't come around very often, or for new builds, new hotels and renovations. In terms of changing franchise agreements, the industry may get there, but it would have to be an industry approach. If one company went out and started adding in a whole load of environmental criteria in your franchise agreement, you wouldn't get many new businesses joining your brands. You'd probably lose business. So we probably need an industry approach to really raise the bar. But in terms of new builds and renovations, what we do, instead of doing it through the franchise agreement, we would do it through basically our design standards and brand standards. So the things that we say a hotel has to do or has to have to be able to be one of our brands. So what we're doing at the moment is raising the bar on that, which is the way we can do it. But it's definitely an issue for the industry and something that we will have to work together on. We are doing a lot in the design space at the moment, but it has to be a bit at a time. We can't just go out there and say every franchise hotel needs to be built as the most sustainable hotel in the world. It just won't happen.
On that rather commercial note, I think perhaps we ought to finish. I think what I can say from what I've learned today, I don't know whether you feel the same, is that intellectually the subject has now been properly engaged by the different parts of the industry. There is only the beginning of a journey. It's the question now of whether that can be successfully delivered. And there are a lot of capable people around who want to deliver it, which is very good news. So I want to give thanks to the panel, who are obviously among those who are the capable ones who actually help to deliver it. So thank you very much.